Hi all, and welcome to our November 22 webinar on the ISDN and PSTN switch off and how you can become ready for the change that's ahead of us. Today, I'll be presenting alongside my colleagues Adnan Safdar, who's a solutions architect working at Resonate, and also Sat Bui, who's one of our program managers. And we'll be talking about the PSTN switch off, what business impact it has to you, and how to plan your migration, what replacement options are available to you, and Sat will go for a retail case study. So just a quick intro to myself. My name is Hakira Deegan. I'm product director here at Resonate, responsible for our products and services, but spent a long time prior to this working as a solutions architect as well. We want to keep the session as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. We've got Sky who will be moderating. So she'll let us know if there's any questions that need to be answered by yourselves. So just a quick introduction as to what's going on. So for anybody that doesn't know, we're talking about PSTN, ISDN switch off. So what is the PSTN and what is ISDN? So the PSTN was introduced during the 1800s as a telecoms network, and it's very much consists of a load of copper wires that allows two people to communicate with each other using voice. That's used as the primary method by businesses in terms of the way they transmit calls and fax, and has been now for many, many years. Coming after that was the ISDN. That was introduced in 1986 and is known as the Integrated Services Digital Network. What that enabled was an upgrade of the communication standard that was being used and allowed for digital transmission. What that enabled businesses to do was to then make phone calls, video calls, and even transmit data over the traditional PSTN network that existed. Fast forward sort of 30 years where we are today, and businesses have continued to advance even further. They've become more reliable on data and IP technologies, and these legacy technologies are no longer capable of delivering the quantity or even the quality of data that we need in our sort of increasingly digital world. You know, as businesses sort of look and continue to look for more bandwidth, for quality, better resiliency, in order for them to stay competitive in today's market, they need newer solutions to do so. So as a result, BT or Openreach announced back in 2015 that they're going to be shutting off the ISDN and PSTN services, and that's going to be happening by 2025. And what we'll be transitioning to is a world where voice calls will be made over the internet using technology known as VoIP, and in some cases using SIP as well. Why are they doing this? Well, it's got to a point where it doesn't actually make any financial sense anymore to keep investing in a technology that, you know, just can't compete. So as a result, we need to brace ourselves for the UK's ISDN and PSTN switch off. Now, I say UK, but this is also happening in other countries worldwide. So do need to keep a watch out for where it's happening in your region. The switch off is going to be happening in your nearest exchanges and when that's closing down. As we stand today, 50% of the 690 exchanges are currently in stop sell. What does stop sell mean? It means that you can continue to use your existing lines, but it means you can't invoke any changes. So you can't invoke a takeover, you can't restart a stop line, you can't transfer to another provider, you can't add to or you can't modify your existing service. You can just use it as it is. And the rest of the exchanges will move to stop sell by September 2023. So that's key date 1 for your diary. September 2023 is stop sell. After the stop sell, we'll be moving into switch off, and that will be happening by December 2025. And at that point, you can no longer use the service that you have. So two important dates: stop sell September 2023 and switch off in December 2025. So what impact does this have to your business? Well, it will impact you in two areas. First one is around connectivity. So if you're currently using any ADSL broadband or fiber to the cabinet broadband technologies, you're going to have to look at replacing these with a technology like fiber to the premises. But what we're going to be focusing on today is the voice services that you may have in your organization or in your business that could be impacted by the shut off of ISDN and PSTN. So some examples of what devices could be still using these legacy technologies. You may have an old phone system or PBX that you're using that may be connected to one of these lines. You may also be using telecare or critical care systems where you're looking after patients that are reliant on these lines. Fax is a big one, especially in certain verticals where fax is critical still as a process. They often use ISDN lines. Old DEC systems, so mobile handsets, also tend to use these legacy ISDN lines, where you've got instances of powered lines. And what that means is that the actual phone line is providing power. And common use case for this is in lifts. Emergency phones and other business resilient systems, but sometimes have ISDN as backup. You may have alarming systems, so things like fire alarms that are connected, or security systems, so CCTV systems. You may have some telemetry systems that make emergency calls when thresholds are breached. And then to do ATMs and PDQs and EPOS, and also you have your non-served premises, so places that may not be an official office space, but if you own things like phone booths or off-premises, rigs or things like that, they often tied down to these physical lines. So I think we're going to put a poll out to everyone. So please do respond in your chat bar about if you think you're still using some of these devices or if you're still using ISDN services. So appreciate your response on whether you think you still got some of these ISDN devices in your environment. So moving on in terms of how to plan. So we've got three areas that you'll need to plan for. So the first one is around planning. And there's a couple of key elements that we want to discuss here. So the first one's about thinking about your service offering. What type of platform are you going to go for? Is it partner provided? Is it something that you're going to host in-house? Is it going to be VoIP based or is it going to be SIP? And that also ties into the technology choices that you're making around, do you need to stay on premises? Are you going to move to the cloud? Are you going to have a hybrid? And Adnan will go through those in a bit more detail about what some of your choices are. Think about your resources, skills that you have on your team, and also if you've got the capacity to do these types of rollouts, because you may need to reach out to a partner to assist you. And depending on what service offering or technology you decide, there'll be plenty of those out there that you can choose from. Something that sometimes gets overlooked is around processes. So people are used to doing things in a certain way based on analog technologies. And you may need to look at readjusting some of those processes to accommodate either newer technology or some of the integration that you're putting into place. So things like, using fax might move to email, for example, if that's one of your business decisions. So yeah, those are definitely some things that need to be looked at. Business continuity is important as well. Often, a lot of these devices are used in emergency scenarios, so you need to really think about how you're going to continue to upkeep that resiliency, especially in emergencies. Um, Budget is another consideration. So thinking about how much money you have to spend will determine whether you choose a new system or whether you decide to integrate with what you've currently got. Um, Changing comms always important in any technology migration. So making sure that your users are aware of what is going on at any given time, if there's going to be any changes implemented, and also looking at informing them of what sort of needs to be what's changing moving forward. And the last one is security. So again, coming from that technology space of, are you moving to the cloud? You might be primarily on premises at this point. You're going to need to open up the conversations around security and making sure that what you do moving forward is done in a secure way that suits your organizational requirements. Once you've planned and you've configured, another important piece that we wanted to highlight is to test. Now, you need to make sure you test all the new functionality. That's a given. But the way that we like to personally do this is to group things into buckets of functionality and run through robust testing plans so that we know that all of the functionality is working as expected. With our critical endpoints like emergency phones, don't take it for granted that if one works, they're all going to work. Make sure that you don't assume and you test them all. You don't want to be caught out in an emergency situation where a phone's not working, and have to bear that risk. The next is around that resilience and business continuity. So don't just plan and design for those scenarios, actually test them. What happens? Is it working as expected? Are there any changes that you need to make? Then it's about piloting. So actually getting these features and functionality in the hands of your users so that they can test and make sure that it meets their needs. And as a result of that, you can look at testing your user communications at that point so that, if you need to adjust and things aren't necessarily clear, you can make those adjustments before you send out the migrations to the rest of the organization. Then it's about migrating. And in terms of a migration methodology, some of the big ticket items is that you need to determine and understand your migration plan. So is that going to be site-based? Is that going to be functionality-based? Or are you going to do that big bang? Creating a T-minus plan to make sure you track everything. And if you need to set some rollbacks, know what they are, at what point they need to be invoked. Having that robust end-user communication, we've already mentioned. And then if you're doing any large-scale migrations, having a way of reporting and tracking to know which features are live, which sites are live, etc., is always a bonus to have, and helps you to communicate to the rest of the organization. So that's the in terms of the plan. I'll hand over to Adnan to talk about what the options are. But before I do that, Sky, is there any questions specifically around this?
Yeah, you've just got one. What is the best solution for emergency and lift phones to cover them when their power is cut?
Okay, that's a good question. So in terms of the lift phones, it's an important scenario because the lifts are not going to be working when there's any power. So that's when you're most going to need to make an emergency call. So there's a couple of different options that you have available to you. You can use an analog gateway that's powered by like a UPS system, and that can provide power to that line. Or you can also look at having devices that work off battery backup. So you can have like 4G SIMs that are charging whilst the power's on, and if the power goes out, you can make calls via a mobile SIM.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions?
No, that's just that one for now.
Okay, cool. So I'll pass over to Adnan, who will talk about your options.
Hi all, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to go through some of the options available and some considerations also along with it when you're moving from ISDN to SIP. One of the key questions that any business would ask themselves is, now that we're going to move to a modern way of delivering SIP, which is going to rely on IP and other methods to deliver that PSTN voice into your system to your users, is there a strategy that needs to be put in place as to what we're going to do with our existing systems, our existing phone systems as well? There's three main options that I really want to talk about, and it could be, that it may be suitable. This might be a suitable option for any one company, or or a simple solution might be more suitable. Three solutions that I'm going to talk about and expand a little bit more about and go through some of the considerations will be on premise. So you may think about moving to SIP, but you're not ready to move your phone systems, and you want to utilize any of those systems that are still available to you, like your on-premise floor. So you may want to stay with your on-premise system. You might have some dependencies requirements, or you're just quite not ready to make a shift yet. You can have the option of staying on premise. You can get SIP um, to be delivered to on premise. You might need to add another component like a SBC or a voice gateway in between to able to communicate between the SIP provider and the PBX. Or you may, on the other hand, go to the other side of the spectrum and decide that, well, I've changing to SIP now, I'm going to decide to just move everything to the cloud. All our services are already in the cloud. We are moving to a modern way of working. You may decide to take all your phone services or your communication services straight to the cloud. So you can move that to the cloud. It's completely supported with SIP. SIP is the only real method of delivering PSTN to any cloud solutions as it stands. Or thirdly, you might decide that actually I'm not quite ready to leave on premise, but I do want some sort of move to the cloud. So you may decide that, part of the business or part of the workforce may need to move to the cloud first, and the other part of the workforce, they have dependencies on your on-premise PBXs. One example I could give is in the manufacturing industry. You've got a PBX that provides PSTN and voice to two sets of users. You get your back office users, the ones that are sitting behind a PC, that don't have any dependencies on legacy equipment or staying on premise. You decide that you're going to pick these users up and move them to the cloud, and you have the other part of your business is, for example, like a factory. You've got a shop floor with phones dotted everywhere, and you may need them to stay as is because of networking or access points or network to the floor. It may not be so easy to move that completely to the cloud just yet. So you may decide to go in hybrid. Within a hybrid means that you have a phone system sitting in the cloud and another phone system sitting on premise, and both are talking through the internet and making sure that they're are able to talk to each other and provide all the services necessary for each workforce, so the on-premise workforce and the on-cloud workforce. So those are the three options that are available. I'm going to go into a bit more details with them. Is there any questions just around this at the moment? I expect not to be here, but if there are,
Yeah,
Sky,
you've got two actually, Adnan.
you sure?
How would you manage paging and tannoy systems in the cloud?
If you move completely to the cloud, you need some sort of equipment on premise to cover that. There's a couple of solutions out there. You could move to complete SIP and decide that the equipment on site, you're going to replace that old traditional tannoys with new SIP tannoys that are out, or SIP paging systems that are available. So you can use that as an option. So they may be powered by SIP. You need to get a SIP connection or registration to the PBX, which allows you to make calls over the tannoy. Or you may have a very complex, or the way the PA system is built around the business, it can't just be replaced or moved. What you can do is you can get gateways in between, like ATAs, and what that will do is allow you to speak from a known analog communication in T38 format, for example, and then convert that over to SIP to talk to the SBC to your cloud PBX.
Great, thank you. And the second one we've got is are there any solutions available that offer power instead of analog lines? My customer has a telemetry platforms that rely on voltage provided from the exchange.
From the exchange as well. You'd think about moving something that's going to provide that power through PoE. So you might need to think about upgrading your data infrastructure. If you need a device that's using the voltage through the analog lines, which it is a very old method of working, that may need to be replaced with some modern pieces of equipment that take the voltage from PoE, power over Ethernet, would be the way forward for that.
Great, thank you, Adnan. That's all our questions for now.
Brilliant. So H, if we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so just go through about how your current infrastructure looks today. In a typical a solution that's a legacy solution that's out there, typically what you'd have is a PSTN line that comes into your building, is connected to a PBX, which then provides that PSTN service to all the devices available to it, i.e. phones, fax machines, etc. And then you have a separate internet line that comes into the business, which provides you the data for all your PCs and any other equipment that require data. That's how it currently stands. So it's kind of two streams working alongside each other, but they have no real communication in between. The PSTN lines act as a separate entity in itself. So you'll have like an NTE on site, which will allow you to connect to the PSTN network, which then provides that PSTN capability to your phones. If we move on to the next slide, H, not a huge amount of currently how we set up it is, but you know, for one of the first ones I want to start on is cloud. Reason being is cloud is the flavor of choice at the moment, with a lot of businesses trying to cut their hardware footprint down to a minimum, and they are looking to move all the services to the cloud. Again, I touched upon it a little earlier about a lot of people are working towards a modern workplace. They have remote workers requirements. There's a lot of modern technology requirements within the workforce. So moving to the cloud seems to be a way forward for people. And also, you cut down maintenance costs and all that other support and everything that's banded around having an on-premise PBX. But just to talk around that, with the cloud PBX, your PBX will be hosted in a server in the cloud, or it could technically be a private data center. It could still act as a cloud. It could be a private cloud, public cloud. The PBX is hosted there, or you could buy a pure hosted solution, which is a solution that provides your PBX and SIP lines as well. There's many solutions out there that are available that provide you with that. That will then be your hub for all your users to connect to and get those services, and they will be connected through an internet link. Going back into your building, it could be remote workers, they could be working at home, it's just through internet, they'll connect back in, and users will then be able to use those voice services or PSTN services via desk phones or maybe through a soft client on their PC. That's how the whole cloud infrastructure would look like on a basic level. It can get a little bit more complex, but just from our discussion, that's how it would look like. Some of the key considerations we need to take away or need to be aware of when making that decision to move to the cloud. Top of the considerations list being adoption. You're moving to a whole new system. The users need to be able to adopt to the way of modern working, be able to understand that they're used to that, they have calling, people have calling habits, dialing habits, using habits. They need to change these habits. You need to make sure that the users are ready. I mean, to get adoption really out there, you need to get the key, departmental decision makers involved. You need to create a championship community, all that good stuff, and get that adoption piece really nailed off, because that is key to moving. Sorry, I think you moved back to the slide a bit early. Yeah, adoption is that's the key to making sure that the users adopt the new system and get a new modern way of working. You also need to consider the migration strategy. You're now moving from one system to another system, and also not only that, you're moving from an on-premise system to a cloud system. There's going to be feature either parities, or there may be feature mitigation that's going to be needed. So great migration strategy needs to be put in place. The reason why is you may your whole business may not be ready to move all at once. You may decide to move people in batches, move people in stages, or you may decide that everybody's ready and move everybody to the cloud. So a good migration strategy really will help smooth that transition from an ISDN to SIP scenario if you're looking to move to the cloud. Communication endpoints is another one. So you probably used to a legacy handset sitting on your desk. You may want to start think about using headsets to replace that hardware footprint, or you may decide that some users are not ready to move to headsets yet for whatever reason, or they don't use the phone system enough to warrant a headset. There are handset replacements out there for cloud PBXs. SIP handsets are available. Those can be um, replaced, and there may be that some people are still using some sort of analogs or DECT systems as well. So you'll have to look at a new SIP form of delivering that method. So you have a fax machine, for example, you can put in an ATA in and have a SIP connectivity and be able to deliver that requirement for a fax machine through the SIP, or you might have a modem that you still use. There are a number of reasons why you could still have some legacy equipment there. DECTs, for example, an old DEX system will rely on an old PBX. You may want to move to a modern way of working with DEX. Is something that you want to consider, and that kind of ties into the legacy dependencies as well. Again, with all the analog stuff, you've got to make sure that now that you move into cloud, what dependencies are tying you back to on-premise. A lot of it is around analog, but those can be mitigated. You can move some of the analog devices and make them IP devices, or you could decide that you may take that analog service and move it to the cloud. An example would be a fax server. So you've got a fax machine that's sitting on premise, relies on a single line, an analog coming in that receives fax on it. You can move that to the cloud, so you get fax to email. That will be one of the major considerations. It's an example of a good consideration to take when looking at moving some of that legacy dependencies to the cloud. And last but not least, which is going to be across the board, in all honesty, is vendors and porting. So you may be with a current ISDN provider that doesn't provide or can provide SIP, or may not be competitive enough, or they may not provide SIP. You got to make sure that the vendor is suitable for yourself. There's a really competitive market out there for SIP. You can get really good offers, good deals, minute bundles. You need to consider all of that. And one of the key things that you need to consider is being able to port those numbers from an ISDN to SIP. With being in on premise, relying on old legacy architecture, moving those numbers takes a little longer, and you may need to put some considerations in place for that. Any questions around the cloud PBX about migrating to cloud before I move on to
no, we don't have any questions specifically on that. No.
Brilliant, yeah. So if we move on to hybrid H, so hybrid is suited for businesses that have a roadmap to move to the cloud, but there are major dependencies on premise that are stopping them from moving to the cloud. But part of their workforce is absolutely ready to move to the cloud. So in that scenario, we'll call it hybrid, where half of your system is in the cloud and the other half of your system is on premise. Some of the key considerations that you need to, well, before I even go to considerations, if I just show you the methodology behind it is you got a cloud PBX. It needs to speak to the PBX on premise. You have a IP link, goes into some sort of gateway. SBCs will be involved. It then passes that traffic over to the PBX, and if it's a user that requires, if you need to contact the user or ring the user, there's an interoperability in between that. Some of the key considerations you need to think about that is you're now in two worlds as such. So SBCs and voice gateways will be absolutely key. There will be some sort of communication that needs to be done from the cloud to the on-premise. So considering the right SBC and the right voice gateway will be key. You got to think about the interoperability and integration. You now got two different types of systems that work in two different ways. You need to make sure that that system can interoperate with the legacy system on premise. And if there's any integration considerations you need to take into place, for example, dial plans, number normalization, user dials a number from the cloud PBX that needs to reach to a user on premises. Some of those integration considerations you need to take in place, and adoption is key as well. Again, part of your workforce will be in the cloud, so the same adoption rules will apply that will apply to the cloud option. You might consider headsets because those people who've now moved over to the cloud no longer require a physical handset. They may be using soft phones on their PC, so some sort of headset consideration would need to be considered. And one of the things that really gets overlooked by is when you're making that decision is the support that comes with it. You're now going to have dual support. You'll have to support the cloud. So there'll be some sort of support in place for cloud, and you'll need to support the infrastructure and the hardware on premise because you're in between two worlds. There is a business use case for people to use that. We gave an example of a factory, but it is out there, but you do need to consider these. And again, touching up on the previous statement that I made regarding vendors and porting, making sure you're choosing the right vendor, making sure that you can meet porting deadlines and all that good stuff. That needs to be considered with hybrid too as well. Any questions around hybrid before I move over to?
No, not currently.
Brilliant. So if we move over to on-premise. Right. So the third option, well, in in my slides, is the on-premise. So right now you're not ready to move to the cloud. Right now there are all the dependencies that you require that require an on-premise system. Maybe a factory, maybe you're sweating your assets. There's a lot of reasons why a company will choose to stay on premise. If you do decide to choose on premise, stay on premise, nothing will change in the way the call's being delivered, other than that you'll have an IP link to the SIP provider, which will then connect through some sort of gateway or an SBC that talks to your PBX and delivers that PSTN. So your internal side of the PBX, the users and everything will stay the same. It's just that when they dial out, rather than they're seizing an old ISDN 30 trunk, they'll use up a channel with your SIP provider. So some of the key consideration is, again, with hybrid being on premise, or hybrid was being partly on premise, SBCs and voice gateways will play key for that, because you need that interoperability between the SIP provider and your phone system. That interoperability is or that connection is what's going to bring that PSTN into your PBX. So you've got to make sure that your PBXs are ready. I mean, a PBX that is on premise at the moment, as it stands with the big push to the cloud, is classed as legacy. So some of those older PBXs will need to be upgraded because they're aging technology. They may have some sort of upgrade or a firmware upgrade, software upgrade that could be applied to it, or they may even need a hardware upgrade to be able to talk to the SBCs or talk to a SIP provider. So that will need to be considered along with interoperability. Also, you got to think about, is anything on premise comes with high maintenance costs, energy costs, all that good stuff needs to be considered. So is that what you really want? Do you want to stay on premise? And you'll need to consider that as well, because you have other options to choose from. So maintenance cost plays a key part in that move to consider when you're staying on premise. Is this value for money? And also infrastructure and hardware support, as we did with the hybrid scenario, is that it's an aging technology. It's a lot of those PBXs they are dated. Some of the parts are hard to find. Some of the phone handsets are harder to find. Some of them are not supported. You got to think about how are you going to manage your infrastructure. Some of them are really just a big system in itself. Will have a lot of different components in there that will need to be supported and or upgraded as well. Though that infrastructure and hardware support will definitely be a massive consideration when deciding to stay on premise. Last but not least, as with the other three, vendors and porting doesn't make a difference, because ISDN is expensive. If you buy in any minutes or using ISDN, it's going to cost you a lot more than SIP. So, you'll need to consider the pricing and everything, same as you did with everybody else, but you'll need to consider the right provider. There are some SIP providers that may not be able to support your current phone system for whatever reason, could be through SIP messaging. So again, leaning on choosing the right SBC or gateway will play key to that. And porting, make sure that you can port from your ISDN to another provider, or you can move those numbers from your ISDN to the new SIP lines that have been put in for yourselves. And that is the three options that you guys have. Are there any questions on the back of that?
We do have Another question related to your earlier question about the telemetry platforms.
Yeah, sure.
So their customer doesn't have any data infrastructure. They've just got remote stations and fields. Is there
Right.
another solution available?
Regarding the telemetry, there's got to be a way that you need to provide any one of those devices. You could go down the GSM route, you can go down other routes that are available out there to get that kind of connectivity to the sites. But the key question in this is that you guys currently have devices that require power to them. So you might need to look at alternative solutions. If you don't have power or Ethernet, you don't have that infrastructure in place, you may look at battery packs or maybe UPSs or something along those lines that will be able to provide the newer devices that power and the new form of connectivity, some sort of power, everything. I mean, whatever wireless solution that you go for, a wired solution, some sort of power does play key into it. So maybe looking at the power supplies and how to deliver power to those pieces of equipment will definitely need to be looked at and discussed further.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions we've got at the moment.
Okay, guys, thank you for listening to me and giving me the time to explain the three options. I'll hand you over now to Sat, who will go through a case study that he's dealt with which he had to face some of these considerations. Sat, it's over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adnan. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Sat Buri here. So program manager, but also I work in the capacity of an account manager for some of our enterprise customers. So even though I'm going to be talking specifically about the retail sector, we are seeing similarities across all verticals. So hopefully what I'm going to go through today, you'll find useful and maybe even something you're experiencing today yourselves. But just looking at the challenges which are forcing some of these considerations. First one we're seeing is a lot of these legacy technologies, your PBX estates are end of life, they're now starting to break. It's becoming very difficult to find replacement parts. And so when they do break, it does create a lot of issues, operationally. And this is a big concern, especially when your operations is very dependent on those legacy technologies and features and functions. Also, what we're seeing is a lot of ISDN providers are increasing the rates based on the switch off that is up and coming. And again, this creates some issues in terms of the operational costs to maintain those environments. And in particular for this scenario, there is also a trial area that is going to be happening in 2023, where some of the retail stores in that area will be impacted. So really, there's no time to waste, and something that we really need to get on the front foot and look at solutions in terms of how we prepare for this. So some very imminent challenges which need a solution pretty quick. So some of the solutions we're looking at, you'll see here is more of a hybrid type solution. So where possible, we use a cloud platform to move a lot of the back end staff, head offices, support offices onto that cloud-based solution with SIP. And where we have the actual retail store, we we implement a more up-to-date legacy technology. In this case, it's a wireless deck communication system. You may have seen this already in some other retail stores where managers have the ability via a headset to communicate to other members on the shop floor. But what we're doing in this scenario is we're actually integrating the wireless DECT communication system with the cloud via SIP and via VoIP. So really gives a hybrid solution. And by deploying this, the benefits we're looking to kind of deliver here is a modernized and supported environment. So whereas if a PBX was to break and nothing's available, in this scenario now, that there is end-to-end support. So there is no risk to your operations. One of the other benefits is by moving to SIP is reducing those operational and call usage charges. So that is also a very big benefit to a lot of organizations. And the third is revolutionizing the way we work today, using newer technologies, improving communications and efficiencies. So whereas before Some of those communications between head office and stores was done via PSTN. We're now moving that over to VoIP and via SIP. So again, further cost savings there as well. So those are some of the pressing challenges we're seeing today. The next slide is just an overall project plan that I was going to go through. So thank you very much, H. So in this particular scenario, you can see that the end-to-end delivery for a hybrid solution, we're looking at a 12-month timeline. And this is also partly to do with the current economical crisis, with chip shortages, creating or being a big part of this and creating a lot of the issues. So you can see if you are planning or you are thinking about a hybrid solution, then really there is no there's not much time to leave this. It's something that I highly recommend you start looking at and planning. But some of the key areas really that are going to be critical to this is around the discovery and shall we say, making decisions, business decisions around your existing DIDs, whether you want to port them or whether you wish to give your colleagues and staff new numbers. And in this particular scenario, it can create some issues where you may have public-facing numbers. So therefore, you have to take other things into consideration, potentially looking at things, PSTN carrier forwards, PSTN or announcements, or even putting in a physical gateway to intercept and to do those forwards as well. So those are just really some of the key pain points or considerations that need to be made here. So really that was it from a high level project planning perspective of what we're looking at, and really I guess the key message here is don't delay, start planning today, because before we know it, it's going to be end of 2023-24, and as Adnan said, there's a lot of adoption that's going to be required for your colleagues. So my advice is to start thinking about this now. Okay, that was really kind of it. So Sky, I know that was very, hopefully that's a good overview, but are there any questions?
Yeah, you've got a couple of questions actually on this slide.
Okay.
Is 1 month generally enough for the planning section of a migration project?
Okay, so in this scenario, we were quite fortunate where the existing environment was well known. There was a lot of information available, and there was a good idea in terms of what they would like the end state to be. So so for this scenario or this case study, for us, 1 month was sufficient. As like I said, a lot of the understanding of the environment was there. But if there is or it's not known, then yes, certainly, a lot more time is going to be required to understanding your environment and potentially looking at some of those features and functionalities and kind of mapping those to newer features. As we know, not all features or legacy features are available with all cloud solutions or base solutions. So yeah, I'd certainly recommend a good 3 to 4 months of discovery if there's not a lot of information available about your existing environment.
Great, thank you, sir. And what are the challenges on the timeline that you're showing?
The one I see probably most is the porting, actually, because with porting, it's an all or nothing. So they're again coming back to business decisions, whether you keep your existing or move. But if you do decide to keep your existing numbers, some of this planning or the porting requests are out of your control, shall we say. You are told when that porting is going to happen, and we see that they're done within business days, within business hours. So there is a risk that if your environment isn't ready or tested provisionally, that when that porting does happen, there could be an impact to your operations during business hours. So yeah, the porting is certainly one of the challenges, along with, like I said, with the current economical crisis, with delivery lead times of hardware. That's certainly the two challenges I've seen so far.
Great, thank you, Sat. That's all our questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. H, handing over back to you.
Thank you, Sat. Appreciate that. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. That sort of concludes the webinar. Hopefully it's been really useful in terms of understanding what exactly is happening with the PSTN and ISTN switch off, how it may impact your business, and also, what options are available to you, and how a normal plan sort of looks for an organization. I think the key message here is that although those dates seem sort of in the distant future, considering some of the complexities that exist, we really do recommend that you start looking into this as soon as possible. And if you do have any follow-up questions, the Resonate team is more than happy to help. So just get in touch via the communicated channels and with any questions that you may have, or if you want to set up a discussion, we're more than happy to do that. So with that, thank you once again for attending, and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much.